Ronald Belford Scott was born on July 9, 1946, at Fyfe Jamieson Maternity Hospital in Forfar, Scotland. His parents were Charles Belford Scott and Isabelle Cunningham Mitchell. He grew up in Kirriemuir and was the second child in the Scott family. The family emigrated from Scotland to Australia in 1952. The Scott family lived in Sunshine, Victoria, a suburb of Melbourne. He acquired the nickname Bon shortly after starting school. Because there was another Ronald in his classmates changed it to Bonnie Scotland. 4 years later, his family moved to Fremantle, Western Australia. Bon Scott dropped out of school at the age of 15. He then worked as a farm labourer and later became an apprentice weighing machine mechanic. In 1963, Bon Scott's life was marred by his involvement in unlawful activities. He spent a brief period in the Fremantle Prison Assessment Centre and 9 months in the Riverbank Juvenile Institution. The charges he faced included giving a false name and address to the police, escaping lawful custody, unlawful carnal knowledge, and stealing 12 imperial gallons 55 litres of gasoline. Despite this, Scott's efforts to turn his life around by joining the Australian Army met with obstacles. He was rejected and deemed socially maladjusted by the military authorities. Scott's vocals were inspired by his idol, Little Richard. Scott started his first band, the Spectres, in 1964 as a drummer and occasionally as the lead singer. 2 years later, they joined forces with another local band, the Winstons, and formed the Valentines, where Scott became the lead singer alongside Vince Lovegrove. The Valentines recorded several songs written by George Young of the Easy Beats. In 1970, after securing a spot in the national top 30 with their single Juliet, the Valentines disbanded due to artistic differences following a highly publicized drug scandal. Scott moved to Adelaide in 1970 and joined the progressive rock group Fraternity. Fraternity released the albums Livestock and Flaming Galah. The band toured England in 1973. After returning from the tour, Fraternity took a break. Scott took a day job at the Wallaroo fertilizer plant and began singing with the Mount Lofty Rangers. Around 11 p.m. on May 3, 1974, at the Old Lion Hotel in North Adelaide, while rehearsing with the Mount Lofty Rangers, a heavily intoxicated Scott had a fierce argument with a band member. Scott rushed out of the venue, threw a bottle of Jack Daniels to the ground, and then rode off on his motorcycle. Scott suffered severe injuries from the motorcycle accident and spent 18 days in the hospital. During his recovery, Vince Lovegrove and his wife gave Scott part-time jobs, such as putting up posters and painting their office. With the dissolution of Fraternity and the Mount Lofty Rangers, Lovegrove introduced him to AC/DC, who were looking for a new singer. With AC/DC, Bon Scott appeared on the band's first 7 albums: High Voltage 1975, TNT 1975, High Voltage 1976, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap 1976, Let There Be Rock 1977, Powerage 1978, and Highway to Hell 1979. AC/DC experienced rapid growth, starting from Australia to the international stage. Their 1979 album, Highway to Hell, achieved great success in the United States, marking the band's commercial peak. However, on February 19, 1980, Scott died after a night out in London with former musician and suspected drug dealer Alastair Kinnear. On the night of February 18, 1980, Scott met with some friends at a club in London. There, he became heavily intoxicated before getting into a parked car belonging to his friend Alastair Kinnear. His friends thought he just needed to sleep off his drunkenness. However, on the morning of February 19, 1980, Bon Scott was still in the car. His friends found him unresponsive and slumped in the back seat, with the vehicle filled with vomit. Scott was immediately taken to the hospital, but his life could not be saved. Bon Scott died at the age of 33. Later, there was speculation that his vomit had entered his lungs, choking him to death. Ultimately, the cause of Bon Scott's death was found to be acute alcohol poisoning. Bon Scott was replaced by English singer and songwriter Brian Johnson, and AC/DC continued to enjoy success, particularly after the release of their album Back in Black, which debuted just 5 months after Scott's death. Scott's body was returned to Australia, where his grave became a sacred place for those who appreciate the unique lyrics he brought to the band. His gravesite has become a cultural landmark. More than 28 years after Scott's death, the National Trust of Australia declared his grave significant enough to be included on the secret heritage list. Reported to be the most visited grave in Australia, on July 7, 2006, to mark what would have been his 60th birthday, the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board completed renovations in the Bon Scott grave area. A bronze statue of Scott was unveiled at the Fremantle Fishing Boat Harbour in Western Australia on February 24, 2008. The statue depicts Scott atop a Marshall amplifier.